of the continued concern about the possible erosion of the state's tip credit. But again, considering the substance changes to the bill as amended by the sponsor, or at least the amendments being offered by the sponsor, hope that you would consider amendments and certainly not pass the bill as introduced. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes, sir.
While we wait for Melvin, I know is lined up in Victor. Is Victor?
I think Mr. Vessier Victor had to leave.
Excellent. Ariel is here. What about Aaron?
He is here.
Milliman?
He is here.
Okay, can you come on up, please, Greg and Greg Brown and Deepak Patel.
Mr. Vice Chair, I can give up my chair and run over to budget and taxation if that helps. Absolutely, sir. Thank you.
Many as possible. Deepak Patel?
He was not able to make it.
I'm sorry.
He was not able to make it.
Not, thank you. All right, what about James Stark? Thank you, James. And Grayson Wiggins. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, I'm Melvin Thompson. I represent the Restaurant Association of Maryland, and we submitted written testimony opposing the bill as it was introduced because we had to sign up on the bill before we found out about the amendments and saw them in writing yesterday. But I would like to thank Senator McCray for addressing big issues for our industry regarding elimination of the tip credit and the devastation this would have on tipped employee income and restaurant operations, and also the concerns that a lot of our members also have about the $20 minimum wage proposal. We appreciate that information, those parts of the bill have been taken out through these amendments. We still have some concerns about the bill, but I wanted to mention that we in our association have a government affairs committee that needs to meet and go over the amendments and later provide some feedback. We have to further discuss those amendments because there's a lot in there to unpack, quite frankly, and we need to talk about those. But as we expressed yesterday in the House committee, we do have some concerns about the study and the data that would be used for such a study. I know it's the Maryland Department of Labor and Department of Commerce that would be conducting the study, but we want to make sure that there's going to be some industry stakeholder input and also that the data is appropriate and accurate for this type of study. So that is a huge concern and something that we hope to work with the bill sponsor on. But overall, we've seen some version of this legislation for several years, and we've been before this committee for the past 2 years, and these bills are typically introduced at the behest of an out-of-state organization who's trying to push for policy changes here in the state of Maryland that tipped employees in the state of Maryland don't want. And those tipped employees are here today. You see them in the green t-shirts. We didn't want to disrespect the committee by bringing hours of testimony again. You've heard from those tipped employees in 2 years prior, so we didn't bring them all in today. But I do want to say this is a concern. They're still very worried about this. And about DC, we heard some comments about that earlier. We might have some conflicting data about DC. Our numbers show there's been 2,000 jobs lost in the full-service restaurant industry since they started phasing out the tip credit there. But putting conflicting data aside, I think it's important for the committee to know on January 15th, the DC Council Committee heard 6 hours of testimony from tipped employees who are talking about the negative impacts of phasing out the tip credit there. 6 hours of testimony from tipped employees. And so I think that speaks volumes that perhaps the situation in Washington, D.C. as they're phasing out the tip credit isn't quite as rosy as the proponents are claiming here today. Thank you very much.
To Maryland in around September, October. Started working for The Point in November, and as a tipped employee, I have never had an issue with the system. Like, I make way above minimum wage, even on slow seasons. I'd work UPS as a side job, and I say that as a side job. I've been bartending 8 years with this system, no problem. A lot of the people that own restaurants were tip employees themselves that still fight. Once again, this is a amendment. I know this bill has amended that tip credit elimination, but I'm still worried that it will still be put to the table because nothing is set in stone. And quite frankly, I do think if you increase all that labor, it has to be supplemented somewhere else. I've heard this from regular bartenders that had to become bar managers, to GMs, to owning their own restaurants. And the whole thing about we struggle to be getting tips it's not always the case. It depends on the business owners, if it's a good work environment. That doesn't come from the whole tip situation. Where I work during our nightlife, we do auto grads for 20% during the nightlife. Certain tables, if it's 5 or more, automatic gratuity. If the bill is $80 and above, automatic gratuity. It's what makes sure it's the food cost that is going up because of our economy, everything that's going wrong with the agriculture and all that stuff. Keeps us protected to make sure, once again, we're not just making minimum wage, we're making well above. And we already know in this industry, sometimes we'll have slow seasons and busy seasons, but no matter what, we still make the money we need to.
Thank the sponsor for meeting with us before the hearing. It does look like the amended version of the bill addresses a lot of the concerns. We got the amendments yesterday, which I believe is as soon as the sponsors got them, they got them to us. We would just ask for a little bit of time, respectfully, to run these by our members. Thank you.
Noxie Hospitality, Frederick, Maryland, couple restaurants. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time today. I'm going to do, regarding the amendments, I tend to agree with what was said. I can't really comment on them. I do have significant concerns just based on the testimony provided previously because the numbers and the stats that they state significantly deviate from what I see every day. I have 150 employees in my business. We do really good for the community. The one most important thing in our organization is the culture. And what I see in some of these amendments, I don't think it really works really well with a company that has a strong culture. So I have some issues. I just don't know anything about it. From other things that were stated today, I agree. DC is a total disaster. It also does not align with what was stated. I would also say it is disappointing from my perspective. There's so many great employees. There's hundreds of thousands of tipped employees in Maryland. So I think Saru mentioned 5,000. Well, I guess we represent the other 99.9% of the tipped employees. I also want to make note that, most of the folks today are going to say what restaurant they worked at. I don't recall many of the prior crews saying what restaurant they worked at, which leads me to believe they may not work in a Maryland restaurant. They may not even be from Maryland. So I think that's relevant. It's just disappointing to see out-of-state activist groups that seem to have that could have a potential major control implication of the business. For me as a business owner, I want to grow. I use the 1 to 8 model. I'm honored to say that I generate $80 to $100 million of positive economic impact a year. I could put up another restaurant, probably do another $30 million of economic impact. But due to the uncertainty of what seems to transpire in these, unfortunately, in the bills each year, I'm kind of taking a break on growth. I'm not going to invest. I'm not going to grow. We know we have a major, major budget challenge. But I'm telling you right now, I can generate $30 million of positive economic impact, which you do the math on the sales tax implications, the livelihood implications on that, and you can see the impacts to the state. So I oppose this, and I please reflect on my comments.
Thank you all for your time. My name is Aaron Milliman. I'm the owner and operator of Rock Salt Grill in Westminster, Maryland. I was born and raised here in Baltimore, Maryland. I've been in this restaurant industry for almost 20 years. I started from the ground up as a line cook, and now I'm an owner-operator of a restaurant that I took a lot of pride in for years. I've been blessed to be able to take over a company such as Rock Salt. A lot of what's been presented to you guys today is just fallacies and not true. If we look at real statistics, we need this tip credit to stay alive. I know this is all going under a wage study, but this has been brought up to you guys for the last 7 years, I believe, and it needs to be laid to rest. This is not a broken system. Okay, to increase minimum wage to 15 to 20 an hour will drastically affect my dreams, my employees' dreams, and the business people like myself. You got to think, their lives will all be over when I have to take away or 20%, add 20% to a tip, or take away that 20% tip, and it goes on the check. That 20% needs to offset the 68% increase in my salaries yearly. That 68% is a massive amount that won't allow my business model to work. And Rock Salt Grill is a restaurant that won Baltimore's Best this year. We cannot have companies like mine and various others sitting at the board right now go under because of people who don't understand the economics of how restaurants are run. That 68% is how I go ahead and pay my food costs, my liquor costs, my sales and use taxes, my property taxes, and how I grow. I have dreams and aspirations to buy buildings and other companies and grow this industry, just like the gentleman to my right. And with the people wanting to take this away from us, it's going to be a detriment to Maryland. DC is not thriving. They are actually losing employees. I have in DC waiters and waitresses begging me to hire them, but I'm blessed to have such a crew that has not left my side, making this $363 an hour. They make well over $20 an hour. The majority of them are almost at 60.
My name is Joe Stark. I'm the Vice President of Hotel Operations for the Best Western Plus BWI Arundel Mills in Howard County. And I wanted to go last just to kind of give the hotel perspective. I'm also the Vice Chair for the Legislative Committee for the Maryland Hotel Lodging Association. I will speak to the bill as it is amended. As it is amended, we like the amendments. We encourage everyone to support the amendments. The biggest component of the bill that would affect us is essentially what is related to the wages, the cost of labor. The cost of labor over the last few years has sort of skyrocketed. And in our business, hotels, we have real occupancy, we have real wear and tear. There's lots of other things to consider, not just labor, but other things I just want to mention really quickly as it relates to the cost of energy, which is going to go up for everybody in this room effective in July. Everybody's supply, even on the residential side, everyone's bill is going to see an increase at the end of July or the beginning of July. Our insurance costs are skyrocketing, supply chain costs are skyrocketing. Just the cost of doing business in general is skyrocketing, and hotels are very similar to restaurants. The margins are very small, and so we try to be competitive with other states. We try to do the very best we could to be great members of the community. We look at our staff as family. That's how I run my business. I'm a 133-room hotel again in Howard County. That's how restaurants are. We're small businesses. On the outside, because we have certain names on the side of our buildings, we may look big, like we're part of something bigger, but we're all small businesses, and everything that is done affects all the way down to the bottom. It affects my front desk staff, my housekeeping staff, my drivers, all the way up and down. So I would just encourage, I like what you guys have done with the amendments. We truly appreciate that. But please keep in mind going forward, anything that would touch small business, all of these little things add up. And I'll just say in closing, the biggest thing that we're working on and trying to bake into the mix going forward is the cost related to implementation of BEPS, which is something else that passed, and we're all looking to integrate that. Thank you for your time, and would entertain any questions.
Thanks, Chair. I'm trying to hold off because I know we're in a hurry, but Melvin, I want to come back to this concept of the tax exclusion on tips. I was asking the prior panel how that would work. Have you looked at that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. What this bill is proposing is no tax on no tax on state income.
Yeah, no state tax.
That's right, I'm sorry, I sometimes get this a little mixed up, that's right.
Yeah.
No tax on tips for state income.
It was $46.50 as a subtraction modification off of your, I don't, maybe I'm a little slow on the uptake and on understanding how that would work, because, I've thought about this, but the amendments too, I'm trying to understand them. They were presented very quickly, early. And there's a study on tip wages. Is that part of the amendments? And do you know if that study is including cash tips as well as credit card tips? Do you have any information on that?
A lot of questions there, Senator. Let me see if I can kind of unpack there. First, let me mention that I think it's important that the committee know we are very much in support of no tax on tips for our employees. That issue, we think, will help our employees. They're the backbone of our industry. They clearly define customer service for our industry. That's what hospitality is all about. The problem we have with the way the bill was drafted is that it's proposing no tax on tips while at the same time eliminating the tip credit. So if we're not eliminating the tip credit and we're solely talking about no tax on tips, we support that. The way the bill was originally drafted, it addresses subtracting tips from the state income tax to the extent that it was included in the federally adjusted gross income. Now, there are proposals pending at the federal level that would also exclude tips from income tax. But you're asking questions about withholding and FICA, and it's my understanding in the federal bills that addresses only income tax at the federal level, and it does not address any FICA or withholding, Social Security, Medicare, those kinds of things. On the state level, I haven't seen any language regarding how any state withholding might be addressed if we are excluding tips from state income tax. I have not seen that language to answer that question. And then regarding the study, I think was your final question, that study language says that the Maryland Department of Labor and the Department of Commerce shall study tips and what those employees are making in tips in tip credit states versus tips that don't allow tip credit, and the financial implications on restaurants in tip credit versus non-tip credit states. I do not know the specifics of how they'll go about that. Like I said, there were a lot of questions about data, but it's likely to include tips in any form, whether they be credit card tips or cash tips, as long as they're a tip that's voluntarily left by the customer.
Yeah, we hear if it's cash tips, I'd be interested to know, because that's a whole other discussion from this. But, one follow-up on that scenario with the subtraction modification. So if the tip credit were eliminated, these $15 an hour, clearly many employees make more than $15 an hour in tips. Would they be getting a tip credit? Would they be getting a tax credit? So they would actually earn more in tips and be able to eliminate. You see what I'm saying?
Well, if you eliminate the tip credit, then what would happen is employers would likely impose a service charge on the customer's check to make up the difference in the labor costs. So the employees would be getting more of their compensation in the form of regular wages on their paycheck, because most customers aren't going to tip on top of a service charge. So essentially, if you are trying to eliminate the tax on tips while at the same time eliminating the tip credit, then there will be no tips to tax, because most of the compensation would be through regular wages. That's the fallacy with the way the bill was originally introduced, and we're hearing in the future they intend to introduce a bill next year to eliminate the tip credit. So that would be an ongoing concern of ours.
Thank you for helping me understand. I love getting rid of taxes on tips.
Many times I've said no tax on tips, but I keep, maybe I'm a little dyslexic and didn't know it.
Well, it's unfortunate to hear your story about wanting to grow and expand in Maryland. It is certainly understandable, and I understand your reluctance to want to do that, seeing about the number of different policies that are being passed here. This certainly being one of them. I'm sure you are aware that a bill was introduced for business-to-business taxes that I'm sure would affect both of you, and again, make it much more difficult to expand in Maryland. And I won't completely talk about that bill just yet, but it is refreshing to hear your honesty about what the policies we're doing and going forward and talking about doing in Maryland businesses. The governor continues to talk about economic growth and trying to find a way to grow our way out of this budget deficit. We don't like to do that, but when you hear from true business owners that just might not be possible, just to let you know, a lot of us hear your voices loud and clear.
Thank you.
Sir, I know exactly what my employees make per hour. I can run a P&L. I know exactly how much it could be a net loss. It could be a net income that the business is generating. I'll put it one step further. From a small business standpoint, right? And I'll use this example, right? The current thing is to increase personal income tax on $500,000 or $1 million, right? Well, put yourself in the business owner's shoes, because you miss a part of that, right? For most business owners, most young, any age business owner, quite frankly, if you want to invest and you want to create jobs, most of us are not privileged with having, millions and millions of dollars just sitting in a bank. The only way we can do that is through leverage. And so from a small business standpoint, you cannot put a price on the value of cash flow. So in Maryland, for example, if you do $10 million in a year and you manage to have $500,000 of operating income, well, now you're going to write the state a big check on that. Then you're going to take cash flow and pay down your debt service. And then you're hoping you want to invest and you want to grow the business. And then maybe you want to invest in some capital, right? Well, on the federal side of things look pretty good. But in Maryland, you can't take bonus depreciation. So now you've got, after you've paid all these taxes on working your tail off 90, 100, 120 hours a week to generate $10 million in sales, to generate $500,000 of EBITDA, I mean, you're left with nothing at the end of the day. And to bring the tip credit, the removal of the tip credit scenario home, While I respect what the prior folks talked about, I think you can do simple math in my mind, right? So in one of my restaurants, my tipped employees work on average 2,000 hours a week, right? So I do that math, right? If you take 2,000 hours a week times, I think it's like 1138, which is really the delta between the 363 and the $15 an hour, just for the sake of math, right? You do that, then you multiply it by about 18% to reflect the employer taxes, then you multiply that by 52. That's $1.4 million, okay? 1.4, that results in about somewhere between a 35 and 40% increase on the prices on my menu. 35 to 40% increase. So while, you know, they said it's going to increase menu pricing in dollar, I mean, it's just real math. I mean, I don't know if and the only way I can get away with only raising $1, right? Let's look at it, right? What really is going to happen is probably a combination. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. The organization structure in my organizations is going to get totally blown up. It's going to totally change. There's going to be a lot less people doing a lot more stuff. We're going to put in technology, right? There's going to be a lot of QR code stuff going on. You're going to have a lot of job loss. You're going to have huge unemployment compensation issues. State tax revenues are going to plummet because I can tell you sales taxes are going to go down. And I would say this, right? You know, January and February have been pretty challenging months for, I think, all businesses in Maryland. So we're about ready to get a really rough surprise when we put out the Q1 sales tax revenue from the comptroller's office. So we should be preparing for that. You add that to the headwinds that's obviously being created by the unfortunate situation we're dealing with the federal government. You know, you got a lot of job loss, and I know restaurant owners all over the place, and they're saying in Baltimore County, Montgomery County, Prince George's, they're seeing the impacts of that. We're starting to see the impacts of that in Frederick. So this is kind of like a perfect storm coming our way. But going back to the point of this meeting and going back to eliminating the tip credit, you have to realize, I look at the numbers. It's very rare that I see a tipped employee in my organization making less than 30 bucks an hour. I also see cases where they're making north of 60, 70, 80 bucks an hour. I have tipped employees that work full time. They make north of $100,000 a year. They love it. They love to walk out of work with cash in hand. They love the flexibility. They love all these things that someone who's great at their craft, someone that's great at hospitality, they want the opportunity to go out there and create that awesome experience for their guests every time. They want that opportunity. They want that opportunity to be part of a strong restaurant culture, be part of strong brands that they can take great pride in. They want that opportunity. They want that flexibility. They basically run their own business in the restaurant. They make a lot of money. And I'm telling you guys, I get it, right? You got all these reports out there, and I can't comment on them because I haven't read them. But if you want to look, I'll give you a report from my business and what I see every single day. I can run a payroll register. I ran payroll yesterday. I know exactly what I paid. I know exactly what the hourly wage rate is for the employees. I can tell you, if I see a tip, if we ever have a situation where it's called tip makeup, which is a situation where an employee makes less than $15 an hour, there's a KPI in place for my managers where if we ever have a situation like that, which, yeah, there are situations like that, they always get the tip makeup. They make 15 bucks an hour, but it's part of my manager's performance. There's part of their annual operating goals, because it's my job. My number one job as an employer is to do everything in my power to put my team in a place to generate the best livelihood possible. So if I ever see that, it's like our staffing model's wrong. Something happened. We've got to figure this out. So I'm talking too long. I apologize, but I just want to give you guys perspective.
Before I get a chance to add some.
Some other hotels, but he got stuck in the storms and traffic coming in. One thing he did want to mention as it relates to doing business and expansion of business and even just business that we have right now are all the increased expenses as related to our debt ratios with the banks and the loans that we have. And that is a big deal when it comes to not even maintaining our current assets, but looking to do future deals and future expansion. And banks, they can really change that ratio, and they look at that ratio all the time. So the more our margins shrink, the tougher it is to sit down with your bank and to have that conversation. And without that, the music stops. So thank you.
How can my boss afford to pay 15 people minimum wage without adding the service charge? Well, adding the service charge to the bill, the service charge only goes to the business. It doesn't go to the server, so no one's going to tip on top of that. So basically, you'll be working for a check.